Hello everyone, welcome to class 4 of Unit 1. Today I'm going to be dealing with some of the topics included in Unit 1, Item B, that have to do mainly with el sujeto en español y el sujeto en inglés. In order to make the most of this class, you should have read Di Tullio's chapters 6 and 19, Huddleston and Palam's chapter 15, and the section included in our handout on pages 31 through to 37. I also recommend you reading chapter 33 on el sujeto en español en el manual de la nueva gramática de la lengua española del año 2010. Okay, I'm going to start by reviewing some of the concepts our professor assistant Laura Rolfi introduced last class from La estructura de la oración simple, el sujeto y predicado by Ángela Di Tullio. Okay, I'm going to turn into Spanish now. Ángela Di Tullio en su capítulo 6 describe algunos de los rasgos formales del sujeto en español. Dice que el sujeto es un constituyente que desempeña una función en la oración. Por supuesto, el sujeto junto con el predicado son los dos constituyentes principales de la oración. El sujeto es un sintagma nominal, una proyección nominal completa, que puede ser ya sea una frase como el estudiante de ingeniería o un nombre propio como Javier. Todo el predicado se predica del sujeto. Se puede predicar una propiedad, un estado, una acción. Esto va a depender del tipo de verbo principal, si es un verbo dinámico o un verbo de estado. En español, el caso nominativo de pronombre es una marca de función del sujeto. Es decir, los pronombres personales pueden ser sujetos y están en caso nominativo. Yo. A diferencia de los pronombres acusativos, digamos, objetivos, por ejemplo, el pronombre me. Eso es lo que veíamos en el capítulo How Do We Learn Grammar de Randolph Quirk and Stein, como los casos del latín en algunas ocasiones son relevantes para la descripción de las gramáticas de algunas lenguas y en otras no. En este caso, decir que el pronombre sujeto debe estar en caso nominativo y no objetivo o acusativo es relevante. Finalmente, dos puntos o dos rasgos que ella describe en el capítulo 6 son los que vamos a retomar principalmente en esta clase de hoy, por eso están en negrita. El hecho de que la concordancia con el verbo en número y persona permite identificar más claramente el sujeto, lo que hace posible su omisión, o sea, la flexión verbal hace posible la omisión del sujeto en español para luego recobrar la identidad de ese sujeto. Y finalmente el hecho de que en español la posición no marcada del sujeto, o sea, sujeto-verbo, que en los universales lingüísticos de Greenberg, por ejemplo, vimos que el orden no marcado en español es sujeto-verbo, al igual que en inglés. Bueno, en el caso de español no es fija, 100% fija, y puede variar por razones sintácticas, semánticas o pragmáticas. En esta clase nos vamos a concentrar en algunas de las razones sintácticas y semánticas. Bueno, en cuanto a los rasgos semánticos del sujeto, Ángela Di Tullio nos dice que el sujeto es un argumento del predicado, que el sujeto es un argumento externo con valor referencial, o sea que hace referencia a una entidad real, digamos. El sujeto puede ser, también nos dice que el sujeto puede ser no argumental, o sea, no referencial. ¿Y cuándo sucede esto? Bueno, en el caso de lo que ella llama sujeto pro, que es el que se arguye, existe con verbos impersonales. O sea, por ejemplo, cuando uno dice nevó ayer, puede haber una categoría nula que es la que hace que el verbo esté conjugado en tercera persona del singular, que digamos nevó ayer y no nevaste o nevaron ayer. En ese caso, ese sujeto pro imaginario, digamos, es no referencial. Pero en la gramática tradicional recuerden que decimos que directamente no hay sujeto. Esto es porque es el enfoque semántico de Di Tullio. También Di Tullio habla del sujeto pro arbitrario. Esta vez es argumental, pero tiene referencia indefinida y no específica. Eran los casos que vimos la clase pasada, cuando uno dice, por ejemplo, te llamaron por teléfono esta tarde, te llamaron, tercera persona del plural, el sujeto es tácito, sería ellos o ellas, cuando en realidad lo más probable es que haya sido una sola persona la que llamó. Pero como la referencia es indefinida y no específica, se utiliza este sujeto pro arbitrario, pero es argumental. Luego dice que el sujeto sintáctico cumple diferentes roles temáticos. O sea, puede ser agente, puede ser paciente, puede ser tema, entre otros roles. Y en esos casos lo llamamos sujeto semántico. Finalmente, esta asignación de papeles temáticos tiene repercusiones sintácticas. ¿Qué quiere decir que tiene repercusiones sintácticas? Que en la sintaxis, en el orden de los constituyentes en la oración, en este caso en el orden del constituyente sujeto, puede variar según la función del sujeto, el papel temático. Como por ejemplo en la voz pasiva. El sujeto sintáctico tiene el rol de paciente, pero el sujeto semántico de agente está pospuesto o a veces omitido. Muy bien. Ahora vamos al capítulo 19 de Ángela Di Tullio, estructuras temáticamente marcadas. Este es un capítulo que habitualmente lo estudiamos por completo en nuestra asignatura, pero en esta ocasión nos vamos a concentrar solamente en el orden marcado para recuperar los conocimientos presentados por la profesora Laura Rolfi en la clase anterior. Las oraciones predicativas y presentativas más precisamente. De cualquier manera, les voy a dar un pantallazo de este capítulo. El objetivo del capítulo es analizar la estructura de la oración teniendo en cuenta las relaciones que pueden existir entre el contexto lingüístico, o sea, el contexto, y no lingüístico. Ahí tiene que ver entre todos los aspectos pragmáticos. La autora analiza los recursos sintácticos, morfológicos y pragmáticos que manifiestan tales relaciones. Entonces, se analiza el orden no marcado y el orden marcado. También se ven las estructuras focalizadas. En cuanto a las estructuras focalizadas, que son más de la oralidad, ella habla y analiza, por ejemplo, las oraciones hendidas y pseudohendidas, que equivalen a las cleft and pseudocleft del inglés, pero que vamos a dejar para más adelante, probablemente para la segunda parte del año. Bueno, vamos con el orden no marcado entonces. En el orden no marcado, que también se llama canónico, la información se organiza desde lo conocido a lo nuevo. Entonces, por lo general, el tema coincide con la información dada y el rema con la información nueva. Given information and new information. Estos son conceptos que ustedes han visto bastante en profundidad el año pasado en Gramática 2. La posición del sujeto en español, por lo general, es preverbal. Lo que decíamos, que en los universales lingüísticos de Greenberg, el español está clasificado como una lengua con orden sujeto-verbo. Por lo tanto, decimos que la posición del sujeto coincide con el tema. Pero como ya hemos visto la clase pasada y en el capítulo 6 de Di Tullio, también puede ser posverbal la posición del sujeto, en cuyo caso coincide con el rema. Y son casos donde hablamos de orden no marcado también. Finalmente, la posición del sujeto depende del tipo de verbo, como ya hemos dicho, y de la estructura del sintagma nominal. Más que nada de la pesantez. O sea, si es un sintagma nominal muy largo, muy pesado, se va a posponer. Eso es lo que ustedes han visto en inglés como the principle of end weight. También aplica en español. Bueno, a ver, vamos nuevamente con el orden no marcado. Dijimos que, por lo general, el sujeto es preverbal y esto sucede mucho cuando el verbo es transitivo. El gobierno cerró la frontera, por ejemplo. Pero cuando el verbo es intransitivo, hay dos tipos de oraciones. Las oraciones predicativas y las oraciones presentativas. Las oraciones predicativas tienen verbos intransitivos inergativos y sujeto agente en posición preverbal. O sea, acá vemos que yo ya estoy dando una definición semántica de sujeto, ¿sí? Sujeto agente, que en este caso coincide con el sujeto sintáctico por la posición preverbal. Alejandro estornudó varias veces o Elena nadó durante 2 horas. Después están las oraciones presentativas. Estas tienen verbos intransitivos, inacusativos y sujeto paciente en posición posverbal. Introducen una entidad en el discurso o la sitúan espacial o temporalmente. Por ejemplo, subió el dólar, pero bajó el euro. Es más frecuente que decir el dólar subió, ¿sí? Llegó el rector al recinto. Ahí vemos que se presenta, se introduce una entidad en el discurso, el rector, y se la sitúa, en este caso, espacialmente. El sujeto sintáctico pospuesto, o sea, el dólar, el euro, el rector, es el constituyente con valor, con mayor valor informativo. Por eso está pospuesto y se relaciona con lo que veíamos de información dada e información nueva, que por lo general la información nueva coincide con el rema en la oración. Si tienen dudas y no entienden bien la diferencia entre verbos inergativos e inacusativos, pueden ir a nuestro handbook, que está colgado aquí en el aula virtual, en el apéndice, en la página 166, tienen una explicación de la diferencia de estos verbos. Okay, now let's turn into English and we are going to speak about information packaging in the clause, chapter 15 by Huddleston and Palm. Organization of the chapter. In this chapter, Huddleston and Palm discuss how the same piece of information can be organized and presented in different ways through various information packaging constructions. The authors speak about 7 packaging constructions which are listed below. Passive clauses, extraposition, existential clauses, cleft and pseudo-cleft constructions, dislocation, preposing and postposing, and reduction. As you can see, we are going to concentrate on extraposition and existential clauses. That's why they are in bold type, and to a certain extent to passive. We are going to say something about passive clauses. Okay, let's compare. Here we have 3 instances of packaging constructions. Number 1 is an example of extraposition. Number 2 of existential sentence. Number 3 of passive voice. Let's see. Number 1. It was a pleasure to meet your daughter, and to meet your daughter was a pleasure. What is it that this pair has in common? And how does it differ? Well, what it does have in common is that the information conveyed is exactly the same. It was a pleasure to meet your daughter. To meet your daughter was a pleasure. The same goes for number 2. There are 2 suspicious cars outside. Conveys exactly the same information as 2 suspicious cars are outside, and the same goes for number 3. A lockdown was ordered by the government ordered a lockdown. So what does each pair have in common? The same core meaning. How do they differ? In the way in which they organize the information, in how they package the information, as Huddleston and Palm state. Let's analyze cases of extraposition. In English, you can extrapose subjects or objects. Let's begin with extraposed subjects. Sentences with a subordinate clause as subject generally have an alternative version in which this subject is extraposed. So, saying something like, that you do that annoys me, is a basic version of it annoys me that you do that. Why basic version? What do we mean by this? This would be the canonical choice, the unmarked choice as regards word order, because it is subject, verb. While in the case of the extraposed version, the real subject, what you used to call real subject in first year, but that now we are going to be calling extraposed subject, has been extraposed, postponed. Since the sentence cannot, an affirmative sentence can never begin with a finite verb in English, we need a grammatical subject. In first year, you learned that this it is an anticipatory it, and that you do that is the real subject or postponed subject. You must have noticed when you read this chapter, and if you didn't, please pay attention to what I'm going to say now, that these authors refer to this it as a dummy it. So this it is an expletive, there's no doubt. In first year, applying traditional grammar, we classified it as an anticipatory it, but Huddleston and Palm classify it as a dummy it. We are going to accept both versions. So you can say dummy it in this case, or you can say anticipatory it. To be on the safe side, if you say this is an expletive, a grammatical subject, well, that's perfect. And then you will be speaking about an extraposed that clause subject, right? I would like to go back to the previous slide for a while because there's something I didn't say. The three packaging constructions on the left are instances of marked choices, while the three instances on the right are instances of unmarked choices, are basic constructions, right, which are considered unmarked. Okay. Now, which are the clauses that can be anticipated by this expletive? Let's see. The clauses that are generally extraposed and anticipated by it are that clauses, to infinitive clauses, and gerundial clauses. Well, you know that you can never anticipate a noun phrase. You cannot say something like, it annoys me, your answer, right? It would be your answer annoys me, that you know. Well, an example of a to infinitive clause, it is key to pay attention in class. Of a gerundial clause, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Well, talking to you is the extraposed subject. I haven't underlined it. Sorry about that. In general, subject clauses are long. You see? This type of subject clauses, to pay attention in class, that you do that. Therefore, the principle of end weight applies. If the principle of end weight applies, the logical thing is that they will be extraposed, postponed. That's why extraposition is more frequent than their more basic alternatives. So extraposition is much more frequent. It sounds more natural, but it's not an instance of unmarked word order. It is marked word order. Let's see, extraposed objects. Extraposition of objects is typically found in complex transitive constructions. Notice that unlike clauses with extraposed subjects, these do not have a basic counterpart, for it would be ungrammatical. Let's see. If you say something like, she found it sad that you had to leave. Find here is a complex transitive verb. So it is its direct object and sad is the object complement. And what is that you had to leave? Is the extraposed direct object is repeating this object. But there's no basic counterpart. It is ungrammatical to say something like, she found that you had to leave sad. So the only possibility in this case would be the extraposed object with the dummy it anticipating it. The same goes for authorities consider it vital that citizens stay at home. You cannot say authorities consider that citizens stay at home vital. Okay, now let's move on to existential clauses. The existential there is an expletive, just like it in the cases before. Also referred to as dummy there or dummy pronoun, whose primary role is to fill in the basic syntactic position of the subject. So, what we used to call the subject slot. Mind you that Huddleston and Palm speak of there as a dummy pronoun, right? This may sound strange, but it's okay if you are following these authors, this label. So the basic version of there was a nurse present would be a nurse was present. And the existential sentence, there was a nurse present, is the non-canonical version. We can see that the displaced subject, a nurse, here, corresponds to the subject of the syntactically more basic construction. This is the syntactically more basic. Why is syntactically more basic? Again, because it follows the basic word order of English, subject, verb. Well, there are different types of existential clauses. We can speak about bare existential clauses, extended existential clauses, and presentational existential clauses. Bare existential clauses. Well, an example of it is, there is a God. Why is it considered a bare existential? Because they have no corresponding basic version. That is to say, you cannot front the subject and say something like, a God is. Why not? Because the verb be requires an internal complement, always, a subject complement. So all the basic versions would be ungrammatical. What is an extended existential clause? For example, there is a snake by the pool, or there are no seats available. There's a doctor or there's no doctor to consult. Those are examples of extended existential. The extensions can be locative, as in this case. It would be a circumstantial of place. That's why locative. There is a snake by the pool. Or temporal, there's a party tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a circumstantial of time. Predicative, there are no seats available. And infinitival, there's no doctor to consult. Finally, we have presentational existential clauses. Please do not confuse these with oraciones presentativas en español. This is presentational, in which the main verb is not the verb to be, but other intransitive verbs, such as appear, emerge, follow, remain, live. This is typical of literary register or journalistic, more formal registers. So, for example, a sentence like, there remain many doubts. Well, the subject here is, the extraposed subject is many doubts. That's why remain is in the plural. There remain many doubts. However, in the case of there appears to be no problem is the extraposed subject, and it's singular. That's why the agreement is singular. The verb is in the third person singular appears. Okay, let's sum up. Let's recall some of the main features of the subject in English and of the subject in Spanish so that you can start comparing and contrasting them. In the case of English, its unmarked position is pre-verbal, subject, verb, object. In the case in Spanish, it's the same. It's also the unmarked position is also pre-verbal. However, there are exceptions, as we have seen, depending, for example, on the type of verb, whether it is an intransitive, a negative verb, or an intransitive and accusative verb. It could be post-verbal and unmarked. In English, because it is a non-prodrop language, the subject pronoun cannot be omitted. Mind you that I always speak about the subject pronoun. When we speak about retention or omission of the subject, we always or only refer to cases of omission of the subject pronoun, not of proper nouns or noun phrases which are not subjects. We'll see that better when we do the exercises. You'll realize what I mean if you cannot get it now. Anyway. The subject pronoun cannot be omitted because it's a non-prodrop language. However, there are exceptions because, as I always say, or as Cook says, quoting Vivian Cook, typologies always leak. There are always exceptions. So, for example, in English, in affirmative declarative sentences, if there is an enumeration, you may omit the subject. For example, if you say something like, the teacher arrived, greeted the children, and started the class. It would be very awkward to say something like, the teacher arrived, she greeted the children, and she started the class. Let's see in Spanish, the subject pronoun can be omitted. Yes, because of our verbal inflections, we can recover the identity of the subject. However, there are occasions when we should retain the subject pronoun, and we'll see on some of the cases in a minute. The syntactic subject in English can take on different thematic roles, and therefore we will be speaking about the semantic subject, the agent, the patient. The same goes for Spanish. In English, there are expletives. Dummy it and dummy there are examples of expletives that perform the function of grammatical subjects. These expletives are empty of meaning. Therefore, they are not arguments. They only fulfill a grammatical function. In Spanish, there are no expletives, no grammatical subjects. However, some authors, like Di Tullio, speak about categorías nulas that are non-argumental. They are not arguments, like este sujeto pro de llueve. In Spanish, we can speak about sujetos pro arbitrarios that are arguments, but of indefinite and non-specific reference. Then it would be interesting to think about the translation of this type of subjects that are indefinite and non-specific into English. Okay, and before we finish, I want to share with you some of the cases in which the subject pronouns should be retained in Spanish. And by the way, you can read about this and other topics related to this topic in our handout. As from pages 31 up to 37. So remember the handout is in our classroom, so you should read it, okay? You should read those pages. Okay, as we have already stated, Spanish is a prodrop language. However, this does not entail that subject pronouns are never retained. On the contrary, there are a few occasions when the subject pronouns must be retained. When, for example, When the pronoun stands alone, or like in ¿Quién ha venido? Ellos. Here the pronoun stands alone. If you don't retain it, well, you're not saying anything. When the pronoun stands alone, or when the pronoun is an indefinite pronoun, nadie sabe la respuesta. Which is the subject here? The subject is nadie. Sabe la respuesta is the predicate. It's impossible to omit it. Sabe la respuesta wouldn't make sense. In the case of relative or interrogative pronouns, we have an interrogative pronoun here. ¿Quién ha venido? Ha venido is not the same as ¿Quién ha venido? So you cannot omit it in this case. Another case, when there is a change of subject. For example, tú eres listo, pero ella es genial. If I said something like, tú eres listo, pero es genial, well, the second sentence doesn't make sense. We need to retain the subject pronoun. When one subject is contrasted with another, and here intonation is also important. This is more typical of the spoken language. So let's imagine a situation. Alguien que dice, hagamos un asado esta noche, mañana no trabajo y podemos después jugar a las cartas. Y alguien puede contestar, vos no tendrás que trabajar, pero yo sí. In this case, it would be impossible not to retain the subject. So, no tendrás que trabajar, pero sí, that doesn't make sense. It's even almost ungrammatical. Also, to avoid ambiguity when the verbal inflections are identical. We said that thanks to the rich verbal inflection in Spanish, we can recover the subjects. But sometimes, the verbal inflections are the same for different persons. So, in the case of estaba, the subject could be yo estaba, él o ella estaba. It's not the same as estuve, where the only possibility is yo. So, if here it would say estuve desayunando, that would be clear, but not in the case of estaba o quería. Right? So, esa mañana, out of context, esa mañana estaba desayunando y quería tomar más café, could be esa mañana ella estaba desayunando y quería tomar más café, o yo estaba desayunando y quería. So, sometimes we need to retain the subject pronoun to avoid ambiguity. And finally, the pronoun usted is generally kept to emphasize the polite tone of an utterance. So you could say, si quiere lo acompañaré, or if you want to sound even more polite, si usted quiere, lo acompañaré. Okay. Before finishing, I would like to tell you something about a task that you will have to do for next class, Friday, the 8th of May. I expect you to have done this task, which we are going to correct in class. So what is it that you have to do? There are 2 excerpts from a tale, and some sentences have been underlined. You have to analyze the subjects in each of those sentences, then provide a complete description of the type of subjects in each language, and list the most salient differences you have detected. Of course, the differences between the subjects in English and in Spanish. Identify instances of retention or omission of the subject pronouns in the Spanish version only. And identify the predicator and arguments in the underlined sentences. Okay, that's the end of the class. Thank you. See you on Friday.